I'm Kerry. I'm currently the Senior Talent Acquisition Manager at Relay Technologies, but last year I was unfortunate enough, I suppose, to be made redundant in what's widely considered one of the worst talent acquisition markets that we've had for some time. So, being the data nerd that I am, I tracked everything and have a little talk for you today about some of what I experienced with some stats from not only my own experience, but also the state of the market in general across 2022 going into 2023. And hopefully some tips as well that will make things a little bit better for us, all based around my own experience, but hopefully stuff you can implement and utilise. So why is this such an important thing? I mean, obviously you're all here, so you clearly think that there is value in the candidate experience. And it's basically how candidates feel about your company once they've encountered your hiring process. And that's across all touch points. It starts the moment they see the job advert, and it goes all the way through until they've onboarded as a successful hire in your business. As you can see, a lot of candidates feel very strongly about elements of the candidate experience, and it actually impacts whether they decide to join your business or not. So nearly 3/4 of candidates that were surveyed at one point said that the smoothness of the interview process is actually going to affect whether they take a job offer at the end of it or not, which I think is quite dramatic, and it's quite a large impact. If you're not interviewing well, you could lose a large number of your candidates. And also, the headline stat for me was the number of candidates that aren't actually hearing back from people at all after they've applied within 2 months. And it's something that I later found to be quite true myself. So we care about experience. We have great experiences every day. It could be the user experience of using your smartphone. It might be the smile you get with your coffee in the coffee shop in the morning. You care about them, you experience them all the time. Recruitment processes should be no different. So we've heard earlier from Mark that employers 77% of them are reporting that it's difficult to find the skills that they need. This is up hugely from 10 years ago. Those of us that have been in talent for 10 or more years can certainly attest that it's got harder and harder and harder to find the skills that we need. And as for people that are measuring candidate experience, I found stats that for me were quite shocking. 44% of employers will measure this once, and they do so once they've hired someone. So that's literally just going to the candidate they just hired and asking how they got on. Now, you're not going to turn around and slag off your new employer and say, oh, the interview process was awful, like you made me wait for weeks, the interviewer was distracted. You're going to be fairly positive, so it's going to give false data. Whereas only 17% of employers are actually doing regular touch points throughout the process, making sure that candidates are satisfied or not at different times. So this is me from my candidate perspective. I was made redundant in September, at the beginning of September last year, and I accepted a job in December. So a few months on the market experiencing what was not a fun time, and I admittedly was very picky. I was making very targeted job applications. I applied to just over 50 roles in that time, which is quite a few, but having looked around at what other people were doing with the scattergun approach, some were applying to lots more, so their stats get even more crazy. I basically found that, as I found earlier, around a third of companies just don't get back to you. It takes a long time to hear anything, and it's not good. As we heard earlier, like little touch points, checking in with people, letting them know you've received their application, just simple things like that are really key, and I didn't get that in a lot of cases. There was, again, 27% of companies I never heard from. I didn't know, I still don't know whether they want me or not. Not that I want them, but it's a big figure, and it's not a friendly figure to look at. And then I thought, well, maybe once I'm getting interviews, this will actually improve. But what really scared me was that interview feedback is massively lacking. It's quite a sad state. At 27% of my interviews, I received very generic feedback. Literally a case of, thanks for your time, we interviewed a better candidate, goodbye. Nothing helpful. And 8% of my interviews completely ghosted me. I can tell you some right horror stories. There was a time where I had to do a 2-hour case study, live sourcing, spent ages on it, prepared, went through the exercise, to this day, I still don't know whether they want to hire me or not. And I don't think my sourcing is that bad, but, or at least I hope not. And it's left a very poor taste in my mouth. And we heard the story about Virgin Media earlier. It was actually a cosmetics and skincare company. I cancelled my subscription to their product. It's true, if you treat your candidate poorly, they lose interest in your brand. So as we move forwards, how can we actually improve what we're going through as candidates? How can we make it better? Like, the expectations candidates have are changing constantly, and the technology we have for measuring it is also evolving. So I thought I'd break it down. I want to look at the application process, the interview process, the feedback, and the onboarding. So first of all, how can we make applications better? How can you actually make it a more enjoyable experience for people? And for me, I found that the simpler the process, the more likely I was to hit apply. And the headline statistic I found, 92% of candidates will drop off before actually going through with the application because of the poor application process. So you want it to be simple. Use anything that's going to make it a lot easier for your candidates to get to you. You don't want to lose them at this very early hurdle. Make sure your site is mobile friendly. That's one of the worst culprits I found for making me personally drop off the application process, was a website that refused to display on my phone. A lot of job hunters are out and about, they might be on the move, they might not be at their laptop all the time, so don't lose them. And you don't want to have lots of forms that you've got to fill in. Ditch the systems where you have to upload your CV and then complete 20 boxes explaining your CV. It still happens and it shouldn't be. Get an ATS that can pass CVs and input that information automatically. Another one that's a little contentious is displaying salaries. I completely respect that not every company is able to display their salaries or not willing to do so, but if you do, it's going to save so much hassle further down the line. Again, the job market last year, the salaries were going all over the place. There's a few companies that were paying what would be considered a good market rate, but a lot of places were dropping their salary expectations for people. You don't want to spend ages interviewing for a role, preparing for that interview, only to be told by your recruiter, oh, the salary is like 20% less than what you're looking for. Yes, there are people that will take that, but we shouldn't have to. We should be paid what we're worth. And not advertising your salary does suggest maybe there's something to hide. Next up, you want to make it accessible. Now, I don't have dyslexia, but I have plenty of friends that do, and I have been told about some wonderful tools. There's a font called Dyslexie, which you can make accessible to people on your website. It's free, and it just makes it easier for those who have learning difficulties in the form of dyslexia to be able to access what you're putting on your careers page. Also think about the colours. Colour blindness is actually a massive problem. A lot of people are colourblind, and you probably don't realise. Someone you know probably is. So try not to use red and green as your backgrounds. They're the most commonly confused colours for people with colour blindness. It doesn't make their experience good. And also remember to do simple tricks like use alt text on your images. Make sure those who are using screen readers are able to access the information you're putting out there. Which brings me on to using videos, using photos, humanise where you work, make the application process look appealing. Make people realise you're more than just words on a page. Make them realise that you actually are humans too, just like them. And finally, try to outline the interview process. I don't want to apply to a job only to find that I'm going to have to jump through 15 hoops, speak to at least 20 different people, and then have to do presentations and case studies along the way. It's probably not for me. Someone else maybe, but not me. I want to find out how many steps there are, what I'm going to have to do at each stage, and maybe who I'm going to be meeting. It just makes things so much more simple. It means your candidates aren't in the dark, and they're far more likely to actually hit apply. So next up, the interview process. Arguably one of the trickier bits to get right. There's a lot of problems that can go wrong. I mean, for me, I found that scheduling was a massive issue. I'd be playing email tennis back and forth, sometimes for a day or two, trying to book in exactly when I was going to speak to someone. You also found that there'd be massive wait times. There was one particular company I applied to, they shall remain nameless, but I had to wait 3.5 weeks in between my first and second interview. I mean, I completely lost interest. I was busy with other things. I thought they'd forgotten about me. I'd written them off. And then all of a sudden they came back and were like, hey, we want to do a second interview. There was no communication. It was a pretty poor experience. And also prepare your interviewers. I know this came up earlier, but training your interviewers, making sure they know what to expect, they know what to ask, what not to ask. It's very simple. And it means that your candidates are going to have a much happier time in that interview room. And the number of candidates that abandon recruitment processes due to poor communications and poor interviews is really high. We don't want to be people that are going around putting candidates off and saying, like, oh, you're going to have to wait 3 weeks, or we're not going to talk to you for 2 weeks in between your interviews. You just want to make it simple. Use an automated process for booking your interviews. It saves time for everyone, even if it's just an automated time slot allocator rather than actually booking right in with Calendly directly. It's really hard sometimes. I've been there when I have to coordinate panel interviews and I've got 3 interviewers and the candidate. I have to make sure everyone's free. That's not going to work automated. But what I can do is get the candidate to send me an automated list of slots where they are free. And then I can spend ages going through my hiring manager's diaries and figure it out without having to go back and forth for hours on end. So I thought the key points for me to improve my interview process and hopefully other people's would be provide information. Don't leave your candidate in the dark. Don't leave them wondering what questions they're going to be asked. Don't leave them wondering how long the interview is. Just send them an overview, maybe of a high-level view. What questions can I expect to be asked? What topics do I need to prepare? And then also be flexible when you're actually arranging the interview. Don't turn around and be one of these companies that says, here's the one slot, like it or lump it. Like, it's a poor experience, it's quite pressurizing, and it doesn't make your candidate feel like they're being appreciated. And then also, when I've talked about before, provide your interviewers with training. So the training doesn't have to be massively extensive. It doesn't have to be sitting down for hours going through webinars. It can literally be a case of teaching them what questions they should and shouldn't be asking, what question types should they be asking. How can they be active listeners? Tell them not to be on their phone when they're on an interview, because yes, that has happened. I have sat in a face-to-face interview room with an interviewer who at one point picked up their phone and checked their messages while I was speaking. Just please don't. And finally, when you're also teaching them, just try and cover some of the unconscious bias training. It is a little more tricky and it is a bit more in depth, but believe me, your candidates will genuinely thank you for it when you're actually being more inclusive and able to appreciate a more diverse candidate pool. And finally, just give candidates your full attention. As I said, when your interviewer's on the phone in the middle of the interview, it's a no. Just pretend at least that you're enjoying the conversation at the very least, even if it's not a great interview. That candidate deserves to feel valued. They've put time and effort into preparing, hopefully, for your company's interview process. They've put time and effort into meeting you. The least you can do is make sure they feel like their time is appreciated. And then feedback. Again, very complex, difficult subject, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. We shouldn't be afraid to give feedback. We shouldn't be afraid to receive feedback either as recruiters. I mean, if you don't give anyone any feedback, they're not going to reconsider your organisation. The simple act of providing just a yes or a no answer, the most basic feedback possible, means that someone is 4 times more likely to want to join your organisation in the future. And also, a lot of candidates state they're never asked for feedback, ever. That's a huge pool of people that we could be tapping into to get great resources to improve our processes, and they're just never asked. And I say, if someone's never going to hear from you again, they're never going to consider you. So just try and be nice. And there are ways of giving feedback without actually negatively impacting your Net Promoter Score as well. Again, the panel before me, they've touched on this. Be constructive, be personal, give someone something tangible. Don't be the company that turns around to someone and says, I'm sorry, we haven't hired you, there was a better candidate. It's really useless. No one can improve from that. No one can make themselves better. It's just good karma. You never know when this person is going to come back around and come back into your life. Maybe they'll come back as a hiring manager in a company in the future. Maybe they'll even be your boss. Maybe they could be working for you or in a role that's allied to yours. You don't know. So just be helpful and make them a better person. And be clear. Don't be ambiguous. If someone is not particularly good at presentations, for instance, don't be the company that says, we're not hiring you, we feel your presentation skills could use more work. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? Work where? Be the company that turns around and said, I'm afraid your slides were a little bit wordy. Maybe you spoke too fast, maybe you were too slow, maybe you didn't make eye contact. Any of these things that are constructive and non-ambiguous are so much better than just saying nothing at all. And also follow up quickly. So I've done some A/B testing before in my roles, and I found that just following up with the NPS, like the impact, just follow up within 48 hours with feedback. The longer you leave giving feedback, the worse that NPS impact is going to be. So say you interview a candidate Monday afternoon, even if you don't have actual constructive feedback, keep communications open. Say, thank you for your time. Say, I don't have feedback yet, but I'm working on getting it and I will get it to you soon. If you have a timescale, brilliant, tell them. Make them feel like they know what's going on. Don't just leave them sitting there wondering, like me, how did I get on? Do they want me? Do they not? For weeks on end. It's just depressing. And again, they're candidates that are never going to come back to your organisation. They're also candidates that are likely to tell their friends, tell their colleagues. If they've had a really bad experience, like I did with some of mine, I told a lot of people. I would quite happily tell people about the companies that gave me the worst experiences and recommend my friends not to apply to them because I didn't want them to go through what I went through either. And then finally, the job search just doesn't finish once you've accepted a job offer. For the candidate, their journey continues. For you, their journey continues. You have to think about the onboarding process. And a structured onboarding process, like what I had to go through when I joined Relay in January, made me feel so much more engaged, so much happier, and so much more likely to want to stay with that business. I can speak from first-hand experience that had it been a complete and utter nightmare, I probably wouldn't have been walking around saying how much I love my job. I wouldn't have been walking around telling candidates what a great company it was. Probably felt a bit embarrassed, to be honest. And I found that when I was doing my data digging, as I was quite enjoying doing at this point, the number of new joiners with a high onboarding satisfaction score who wanted to have a long-term career at that organisation was 77%, compared to those who had a low onboarding satisfaction score, which is 29%. Okay, it's not perfect. A great onboarding is never going to guarantee they want to stay. But look, you can make it so much better for candidates. You can make it so they actually want to stay at your organisation, so they want to have career growth with you, they want to stay, and then your retention drops. And then you're not having to go out and hire them and replace them again and spend more time on it. So the key takeaways for me from going through 3.5 months of job searches, applications, interviews, and everything else, the key points that I want people to remember when they're thinking about their candidate experience were with regards to applications. Provide the information. Don't leave them hanging, don't leave them in the dark. Make it easy to digest, make it look appealing, make them want to desire to work for you. Then improve your interview process. Communicate, drop them an email. As Sean said earlier, say thank you, say good luck. It's a little thing that can be automated. It doesn't have to take all the time in the world, but it makes that candidate feel valued and important and like they matter. They're going to want to work for you. And finally, with onboarding, don't just wing it. Use a solution, organise it. It doesn't have to be all singing, all dancing, technical this, technical that. It can be done in Asana, it can be done in a spreadsheet. But make sure you have a process for it, write it down, and make sure that your candidates get to enjoy it. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I believe they're going on to Slido.